Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. A nice intimate group for an intimate conversation between friends. We're really excited to have you here for the second Keith Timmons lecture series. Coincidentally, this is Women's History Month. Coincidentally, we have three incredible, brilliant women on the panel to talk about their work, much of which does deal with the female, in fact, very particular historical body. Monique will unpack that for us. I hope. As Monique Wright, Elizabeth Colomba, and Alexandria Smith possess ostensibly distinct artistic voices. Smith's expressionistic, even hybrid figures explore the relationship between femininity and spirituality, surreal landscapes and the sublime. Colomba's portraits of women also exalt the figure, while the artist's approach is formally more traditional. She uses her technical skills to interrogate canonical tropes and references. Tonight we will discuss the career trajectories of both artists and the surprising ways in which their practices intersect. You can see behind me a slideshow of their respective works. Right now that's Alexandria's work, and then you'll see Elizabeth's. Alexandria Smith is a mixed media visual artist based in London and New York. Not New York. Just New York. Sorry, we have the wrong information. You were director of painting at the Royal College of Art, but now director of undergraduate studies in painting at Yale University, so very esteemed and distinguished. She earned a BFA in illustration from Syracuse University, an MA in art education from New York University, and an MFA in fine arts from Parsons The New School for Design. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Queen's Museum Jerome Foundation Fellowship, the Pollock-Krasner Grant, the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture Fellowship, the Virginia A. Myers Fellowship at the University of Iowa, and the Fine Arts Work Center Fellowship. She has been awarded residencies, including MacDowell and Bemis, Yaddo, the LMCC process space. Smith's recent exhibitions include her first solo museum exhibition, Moments to Effigy at the Queen's Museum in New York City, and a site-specific commission at the Bemis Museum at Wellesley College in 2019. Alexandria currently has a solo exhibition, maybe this is dated to Memoirs of a Ghost. Recently, her solo exhibition, Memoirs of a Ghost Girlhood, a Black Girl's Window was on view at the Currier Museum of Art in New Hampshire. And recently, also this is
Hong Kong, just say Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, at Gagosian, the gallery, a big show titled Pretend, Gravitas, and Dream Aborted Givens. Is that correct? Wait. Pretend?
Show.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. Elizabeth, I hope I get this right. Elizabeth Colomba was born in France and raised
in Épinay-sur-Seine.
Thank you very much. Parents of Martinican descent. She lives and works in New York City. Elizabeth received a degree in applied art from the SDN, School of Art in Paris, and also studied at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Colomba's paintings have been exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, Park Avenue Armory, New York, California African American Museum, great space, in Los Angeles, the Baltus Grand Chalet in Switzerland, the International Biennale of Contemporary Art in Martinique at Volta in New York City. My Italian friend, please pardon this pronunciation, the Fondazione
Biagiotti, I think.
Biagiotti, thanks, he's Italian, he's Italian. Biagiotti Progetta Art in Florence, do you know it? Super. And the inaugural Triennale at Columbia University in New York City. Her work is included in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Portland Museum of Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, my beloved Studio Museum, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Arts, the Park Avenue. These people are so accomplished. Armory, J.P. Morgan, Yale University, the Princeton University Art Museum, among others. And lastly, her work was featured on the cover of The New Yorker to commemorate Juneteenth in 2022, and most recently in the International December 2023 issue of Vogue. So congratulations. My last one, I'm sorry. Monique Long is a writer and independent curator based in New York City who has worked with artists and exhibitions across the U.S. She has developed work with institutions including the Portland Museum of Art in Maine, Princeton University Art Museum, the Guildhall in East Hampton, the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, and the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. Long has also contributed to arts publications widely on contemporary art, personal essays, and fashion history. Her most recent exhibitions are currently on view at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh. She just got off a plane to be here with us, y'all, from Pittsburgh. And she is working on a book about her beloved hometown, Philadelphia, and contemporary art. Please give it up for
Thank you so much, Cliff, Peter, and David for having me back, rather. This is your first time at the Academy, and I also want to say a special thanks to Keith Timmons for sponsoring this lecture series, and I'm so honored to be in conversation with both of y'all tonight, so thank you so much for agreeing to do this. So let's get started. Just in my conversations with the two of you, I learned that you have something quite surprising in common with the beginning of your career, and I was hoping that you'd be willing and able to talk about it. You both have a background in film. Alexandria and Elizabeth both began work in film, and just wanted to talk to you about your experiences, if you would, and also the ways in which if it did, in fact, influence your painting practices, how? I know storytelling would be perhaps one way, but are there others? And if you could just start with your experiences and then talk about the relationship.
Yeah. Maybe you're unaware of the connection.
I had no idea.
So my interest in art started with animation and a desire to be a character designer and animator, which is, yes, exactly what Elizabeth ended up doing for a good portion of your career. Right?
Yeah, the storyboards, yeah.
Yeah, storyboards. So that was my initial interest in sort of, in entry into the art world, and that's why I went to Syracuse for illustration, because I thought, I'd be an illustrator, I would, develop characters for films and things like that. I did a lot of interning at animation studios and just making my own cartoons, the traditional way, cell animation. That was a long time ago, in the 90s. But I didn't pursue it beyond college. I realized I didn't want to work for anyone else. I wanted to make my own work and work for myself. So just pursued fine art after that.
And Elizabeth? The mic is so far. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I did storyboards for many years. After school, it was a way for me to still be able to do art and to draw and still do something that I love and give me time to paint on the side because storyboards, it's not a full-time job, but it's a great paying job. So it was a good balance, and it was also a way to still be creative because you work with directors. Some are quite known and very talented as well. So it opens your mind. It opens the way you tell a story as well. Storyboards is basically, I'm sure everybody knows, but just in case, is a way to cut a script and to put everything in images for either the director, the producer, the director of photography. And so it was a way for me to be able to tell a story in 2D, which I feel really helped me with my work as well.
Wow. And you made a film in 2018 for the Metropolitan Opera.
Yes.
How was it to sort of be on that side of things, to sort of employ what you had already done in the industry to your own work?
Well, there's a say in Hollywood that a storyboardist is a frustrated director. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely love, it's very different than obviously painting, because when you make a film, you collaborate. And I had a wonderful team. Monique was actually one of the producers of the short film. So it's a different way of working, which was, new, because you have to discuss your ideas with everybody, and everybody has to be on the same theme. But it was great, actually, and it was lovely to be able to use the skills that I had before, because it helped everybody. Because we had such a short time to make that film. We had 1 day. And it basically helped all departments to work towards the same goal. So it was really a nice experience.
Right. We had 1 day, but we worked a lot before.
Yeah, 1 day of shooting.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So Alexandria, yours is such a singular world that your characters inhabit. The contemporary landscape, your work is very unique in visually in your language. Can you talk about the way you developed your voice?
Yeah, my voice started with drawing and collage. That's always sort of my security blanket, my foundation in my practice, and just intuitively drawing and wanting to find a way to, initially it started with making more paintings of like brown girls engaging in play. That was sort of earlier work. And then I started making color prints of those paintings, and then those copies were collaged. So I was using my own source material as collage, source material for the collages. And then these figures emerged that were sort of these hybrid I call them amalgamations of girlhood or psychological avatars almost, or emotional avatars that are representative of girlhood. And that sort of lent itself to just this whole world and these characters developing that are sometimes caught in states of flux, emotional flux, physical flux. Other times, in this work, they're seeking light, or seeking the light, both metaphoric and psychic, physical, spiritual light. And it's just the world it is unique, and it's not necessarily reflective of our world, but they are in many ways situated in some aspects in our world too. They're kind of one foot in both. It really depends on the work. Right. But I am tapping into like the sort of spiritual and surreal landscape in my practice, yeah.
That's interesting, kind of a metaphor that they're hybrid in appearance, mm-hmm. and indeterminate, mm-hmm. figuratively, yeah. But also straddling the world, these metaphysical worlds as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the language just developed over time. There's some recurring motifs like the flames, the eyeballs. I call these figures, they're black glitter. You can't really see it in the image, but I call them like the ancestor heads. So there are these recurring motifs that pop up in my work that sometimes mean something very specific to me, and other times it changes. And I don't really tell people what that means, because I'm as interested in what other people bring to the work as much as what I think of it. Sometimes that changes too, even my own understanding of the work. So, yeah.
And I guess a follow-up question, which mm-hmm. would be for both of you, is at what point did you have the epiphany of that this was what you would do, this would be your visual language? When did you understand that to be the case?
Oh. Okay. Well, it's a story I've told many times, but I'm going to say it again.
And it doesn't have to be an exact chronological, but what was that sort of impetus?
It was a moment where I was in France, and it was a school trip, and I saw this painting in the Louvre, which now today is named Madeleine, but at the time it was called Portrait of a Negress, which was made by Guillaume Benoit, and it was the first time I saw a black woman portrait in a classical way from the 18th century in a museum in France. And I think when I saw it, I realized that I never saw it before. So I was compelled to not only analyze it, but to research around it and find out that there was not much around it. I think it really gave me a path to practice what I do and research stories of black women and represent them in that way. Yeah, I think that was the moment.
Mm.
I love that story. I guess you're asking about the moment when I realized that I was going to make work about womanhood or girlhood, or...
What was the thing, what was the impetus? So if you could talk about if it was another work that you saw or in your process of drawing.
I mean, going way, way back, I would say it was seeing the Venus of Willendorf sculpture in my art history book way back in probably junior high school, I feel like. Yeah, I think that was, and I was just like, oh, this looks like my family members' bodies. Like, this looks like a black woman's body. And there wasn't a lot done about, like, at that time, like a lot of history about it or who it was representing. There's a lot more now. But I think that was the first for me. And then I would say, when I decided, I'm going to be an artist. My mom says it was when I was 3 years old. I have like a journal entry from when I was 6 that says I'm an artiste. And I spelled it ARTIES. I tell that story. And I like to write books. That was like my declaration at 6 years old. But when I knew it was what I wanted to do, and I committed to that well after 6 years old, was seeing Faith Ringgold's Tar Beach. It's one of my like favorite artists and books of all time, and that for me was like, oh, I can actually do this. This is possible for someone like me.
Wow. And that perfectly segues because, Faith integrates the images that she makes with text. Yeah. And both of you are heavily influenced by literature. I was going to bring this up, but it's there in the work and the storytelling that you both do. And your mentor, Alexandria, was one of the most important critics of our time, Greg Tate. How does a painter get a mentor who's a writer if they're not deeply engaged in literature and writing, especially with someone like Tate? Yeah. So can you talk about the ways in which it's a part of your process? And Elizabeth, you often paint figures from classical mythology. So I would love to hear from both of you about how that became married in your work.
Okay. Well, I would say the inspiration in literature, it's also about translating stories of women. So some of my paintings are portraits. One of them, I think that hopefully is going to be seen, is one of Harriet Jacobs.
The other Harriet, who's also an abolitionist, not to be confused with Harriet Tubman.
Oh yeah, Harriet Jacobs, who wrote a beautiful memoir that really helped me do a portrait of her. Also this is Daphne, so it's from a mythological story. So I would say it does influence me in the sense that I love storytelling, and I love being able to tell stories through my painting, and I love to explain them to people. I love to find details and iconography, because I love the language of iconography, which is a language in itself, and to decipher all the symbols you can find in a painting and be able to get the full picture of it. So I do love that. So I think, in a way, that painting is almost like a form of literature. So it goes hand in hand with it. I read many different type of books. It could be intellectual, could be less intellectual, but they all find a part in, I would say, in my work, for sure, you know.
And a lot of contemporary artists seem to be influenced by particularly Jacobs right now. Torquase Dyson, who's in this iteration of the Whitney Biennale, made a whole series of sculptures based on the same book. And Simone Lee, she's been organizing this convening of Black women creatives for the better part of 10 years called A Loophole of Retreat, which is a phrase that comes from Harriet Jacobs' narrative of where she hid when she escaped from slavery.
Yeah. I didn't realize those connections. It's true. Yeah.
It sounds like a show I need to make, actually.
I think so. You need to copyright that. TM, Monique Long.
TM.
Yeah. Literature, I grew up collecting comic books and, cartoons. That was always my heart. And so reading was always just an easy escape for me and a way for me to let my imagination run wild. And wanting to connect imagery with writing was what drove my work for a long time. And now I think it's just evolved into, I love magical realism. I love that genre. I read Marquez and Toni Morrison, and the list goes on and on. Tate, of course. I read art theory and theoretical texts. But it's always been, I'm not illustrating particular text, specific texts, but language, titles, phrases, things like that are also a part of the sort of symbology of my work too. So it's not just about the image, it's about the titling. Even my show title, Stirrings, this was from Stirrings of a Polymorphous Bloom, which I just had in Hong Kong, came down at the end of January. But a lot of that, thinking about translation, having to explain to them what that meant in English and then trying to find the words and the characters to explain that properly. It's just fascinating. I'm just really fascinated by language, and I love writers. I love poets. I carry boxes of books with me from London to New York and back. It's just ridiculous. I have so many books, and it makes me feel like home. So I'm always reading. It's a part of my practice, my process, and way of thinking.
Just to continue with the flow of things, since you brought up Hong Kong and London,
yeah,
you were recently the head of painting at the Royal College there, and you were there for a little while.
Yeah, now 4 years.
Wow, was it that long?
It was, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's crazy, I know.
And, is there anything that you had to adapt to with respect to the contemporary art scene? Anything that caught you by surprise that is different from your experience here? You're a native New Yorker, you're from here. And
language for sure. You say trousers there, you say pants, it doesn't mean the same thing there.
Right.
So that was interesting. But I think in terms of the contemporary landscape, I think there were fewer galleries and more institutions, and so the gallery scene was very small, and that was surprising because London's known as a big city, but the gallery scene isn't as expansive as it is here. So that was interesting. And then working with grad students, there was here it seems like we all love figuration, but they're obsessed with abstraction. So it was kind of the opposite, and I was like, oh, this is peculiar. I'm not sure why. We had very few students making figurative work, so that was interesting. And I think it's definitely very different here. So I think just generally the contemporary landscape was more of a focus on there was more risk-taking over there, I would say. And maybe that's a result of having a smaller gallery scene. I don't know. And that was exciting. Yeah. The weather was not, but that was rough.
Oh my God. And so, Elizabeth, you represent the opposite sort of migration story. You're European, and you came here. So I would ask you the same question just for balance, and also I'm interested too. what surprised you the most? What did you have to adapt to with respect to working artists in the contemporary art scene?
I mean, it's interesting because a few days ago I did an exercise with a collaborator where I needed to translate a text, an English text into French, right, talking about my work. And we found out that the language to speak about black bodies doesn't really exist in France. Like, it was very difficult to carve the right words. And I thought it was quite clever on their part, because if you don't have the vocabulary or even the terms that exist, you can't really talk about it. So...
Another form of erasure.
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was quite interesting. I never realized it until I had to translate exactly what I was saying in English into French. I mean, we found a way, but it was more painstaking than I thought. So I would say, being here compared to France, I would say I found a community that I didn't have in France, really. And I had the room to obviously do my work, but also to paint what I wanted to paint and have somebody and a whole community understand it and push me and do it and support me. So I think that's the big difference, really. Mm-hmm. No shade to France.
Wow. So Alexandria, your work is coming into space. I've noticed in the last, I don't know, I guess 4 or 5.
2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are high reliefs in the work, even sculptural. I've seen, I guess I was thinking about the installation you did at Expo, which was longer than that, I think.
Yeah, it's 2019.
Yeah. Can you talk about that and that transition to more sculptural?
Yeah, that started with, I think I have London to thank for that, but I'll start further back. The installation you're talking about emerged from the Queen's Museum installation and solo that I had. And I wanted to imagine my paintings in the round. So I was bringing elements from my paintings into like columns and black glitter into the space, while also fusing that with like a lot of historical research of one of the oldest burial grounds in Queens. So that's where it started. And then before that, my collages, I was always trying to figure out a way to immerse the viewer in the world that I was creating. And so I made these like collage installations. But then when I moved to London in 2019 and we took our students on a trip to the Venice Biennale, and I went to visit the Peggy Guggenheim collection, and this is before COVID, so there were facsimiles, like dimensional copies of paintings next to the painting, the original. So you could feel the sort of the textures, the curves, the relief elements were replicated in these copies that you would see painted on 2-dimensionally. And I'd never seen anything like that. And so it was for the visually impaired. And it blew my mind. I still use that and talk about that because it heavily influenced my work now. And so my dad, who passed recently, he became visually impaired towards the end of like the last decade of his life. So he had to adjust from being, a seeing person that was a doctor to then not being able to see at all. And so when I saw those copies, I was like, I just had an epiphany. I was like, oh, this is a way for my dad to experience my work. And so I figured out, and I just, from that experience, started making these layered, I call them dimensional assemblage paintings because they're layered pieces of wood. And I experiment with different depths of wood to also replicate perspective. And so it looks flat, but there's sort of along the left side of the figure, that shadow isn't Trump Lowell, it's actually a shadow because that figure is more like a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch depth. So almost every element in the paintings have, they're collaged or layered pieces of wood. You only see it when you look at it from the side in photos, unfortunately, or video. But, and that's where my work is now, is making these sort of dimensional paintings as a way to sort of force the work into our world, but also pull you into the world of the paintings. And so it emerged from that experience. Wow. Yeah.
And Elizabeth you're experimenting with scale You have a series of watercolors which are quite large, a series of watercolors. Did you want to talk about the premise for the project and where you are now? I know there's a few in the slideshow here.
Yeah, I think there's one in the slideshow. So it's a series of large watercolors I call the Leisure series, which is about the black body in leisure. And I wanted to place the black body in, front of those stately homes that are, those stately homes were the subject of a bit of a scandal in 2019, where they found out that...
This is the work.
Yeah, this is one of them. And they found out that the owners of those original homes, after the abolition, complained to the state, to the government, the British government, and claim reparations because they had a loss, because they didn't have any free labor. And the government said, absolutely, you need those reparations. So they got a huge amount of money, colossal, something like $65 to $80 million each in today's money. And there was a bit of a scandal because they released the names of those stately homes in 2019, and I think there's more. So I'm choosing to put those protagonists in front of those homes. And that's what the painting, this one is Harold House, and it's named after the stately home. So it's a whole series about black characters in leisure in front of those homes. And it was also at the time where black bodies were getting either shot, yelled at for no good reason when they were in either resting pose or in leisure. We remember about, police being called on guys in a Starbucks cafe. We remember a guy being shot just, jogging. So I wanted to see and compare it to the leisure of aristocratic and what we can see in museums, in institutions, and how it differs when it's a black body in leisure versus a white body in leisure. So that was my interrogation around this series. And the reason why I chose watercolor, I think there's a lightness to the medium that I like to associate with leisure. And the reason why I made them grand scale, I think there's something grand and about also those stately homes. And truthfully, I thought it was going to be quite easy to do a large-scale watercolor because I do small watercolors, and I thought, well, I can knock those out in 3 weeks, and not at all. It was actually worse than oil painting. Like 50 by 60, something like that. So I just thought, well,
about the size of the screen, but
a bit bigger.
Yeah,
bigger than this. Yeah. So it's not as quick as I thought, but I'm dedicated, and I'm hoping to finish at least 5 of them. 2 down. There you go.
Wow. So I wanted to turn back to literature because I always remember spending some time with you in your studio and talking about your work. And one of the best conversations I've had in an artist studio is talking about your thesis show and the premise for it, and was hoping that you would talk about it here, and then have a broader conversation about our influences in literature and on our work.
That was a long time ago.
It was Next Haven.
That was 14 years ago.
No.
Oh my goodness. I didn't realize we go that far back. Wow. My thesis show in grad school, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That was around the bluest eye. I realized that a lot of sort of these ways that Toni Morrison uses language, that was one of my favorite books. I love Toni Morrison. I can't read all of her books. I'm still struggling with a few. I'm working on it. I read a lot of them, but that one always stuck with me, and I've reread it at different, every maybe decade or 15 years. And at that time, I'd read it again for like the 3rd time, and realized that a lot of the figures in my paintings were, in some ways, I was using them in similar ways that Toni was using language in The Bluest Eye to sort of speak to these more difficult, taboo subjects in the Black community. And I guess, man, you're taking me back. Yeah, I guess it was just I wasn't reading it word for word and like replicate or illustrating it at all. But it was kind of sitting in the back of my mind the way a lot of like literature even now does for me. It just sits there and things come up and emerge. And then I realized, oh, I was in this same headspace when I was reading this book and then making this painting. And there are a lot of like overlaps in terms of just emotionally what I'm thinking about, experiencing in life that are replicated in the paintings or that are similarly in the books. And I guess it was just one of those texts that I always kind of go back to. This idea of the figures in that book, some of the main characters being unseen, and this idea of visibility and hypervisibility, which is a huge sort of concept or recurring theme in my work. And how can I make these figures that are still, they're humanoid, they're human-like, but they're not human, and allow them to still be visible and seen, yet simultaneously have a sort of autonomy and power that only they can possess, that is relegated or just specifically for them. And I thought a lot about Claudia in The Bluest Eye. I remember one of Toni Morrison's interviews, she said that, I forget who it was, asked her if there's any character that she feels like she did a great disservice to. And she said one of the characters in The Bluest Eye, and I immediately knew it was Claudia, which was the best friend of Piccola, who was the one that experienced all the abuse in the book. And I was like, oh, and I started making paintings. I was like, okay, Claudia is now becoming seen in these works, in these paintings, and getting sort of the respect and love that she needed in the book. And I think my characters are always doing that in some way. They're demanding to be seen, and both through color, through texture, through the sculptural dimensional elements. I think that's something that's always been present, in paintings. Yeah. This one is actually disappearing or reappearing depending on how you look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the thesis show because I wanted to sort of demonstrate how artists have these motifs in their work that carry through, and they reappear, and you see them. In Elizabeth's work, there's actual books everywhere. Your mother is holding a copy of her favorite book in her portrait, and you have libraries, like stacks and stacks. Is there any particular book that's influenced? Well, I guess the Harriet Jacobs. But are there any others?
There's many. It's so many. And when you asked me about this, I was trying to think about how, because also it depends on moments in your life, what they mean. But there's, I would say, Les Misérables from Victor Hugo. And I think there's a thread between all the ones I'm going to name, right? I think The Count of Monte Cristo from Dumas, right? There is Man's Search for Meaning, which was a beautiful book by Viktor Frankl. And I believe also Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. And I feel what I like in all of those is the idea of resilience, of the idea of justice and injustice, the idea of visibility. You were talking about visibility and visibility. I think there are all those themes, and it's very societal and of course political, but I think all those themes are a red thread between all those books. And I think that's why also you can see this in my work as well, the idea of resilience. That's why I love making portraits of that. Those incredible women like Harriet Jacobs or B.D. Mason, because they're basically teaching us how, despite their circumstances, their resilience and their will led them somewhere else. I think it's incredibly inspiring.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think there was a way in which there are obvious connections, subtle connections, obvious differences, subtle differences. But you were talking about your Queens project earlier, Alexandria, which I think is very, connected to Elizabeth's work with these Black women in history like Jacobs or Biddy or others. In the interest of, Cliff pointed out Women's History Month, can we talk about the trajectory of women's careers and just philosophically, any thoughts? I think a lot about Faith or Lorraine O'Grady or Betty Saar and these nonagerians who are just getting attention in shows and monographs.
I love how we both rearrange ourselves in our seats.
This is a question I wanted to have in advance, actually.
Oh yeah. Okay. I mean,
no.
we can think out loud, or we can. If you have any advice to give to some of the students in the audience, anything that you've learned that you wish you knew when you were starting out.
So many things. I think that yes, two questions. I would say that these people that are getting recognition, it's long overdue. We say that, can't say that enough. There's still firsts that are happening, and it's 2024, and just across careers in terms of Black women being represented, Black and brown women being represented in different fields. But and I was just at the Davis Museum for Lorraine's opening, which was incredible, and I'm glad she's getting her flowers and she's getting her just due, because her work is incredible and the way she thinks and her writing, So, and there's still so many other people that aren't getting recognized, and artists. And I think that you have to, segueing into advice, you have to do it for yourself first and foremost. You can't make the work or try to pursue this path for anyone else, because it won't last. And I think it shows. The authenticity in your work shows if you're not committed to it and if you don't believe in it. And I think the best advice I received was always keep a work of art for yourself from every body of work. That was from Micheline Thomas way back in like 2007. She says it all the time, and I keep saying it, repeating it. 2007, when I met her, she said that, and I never forgot that. And I do keep a work of art for myself, because oftentimes you can't afford your own work, right? You can't afford to buy your own work, so you have to keep it, right, when you make it, to build your own legacy. And the other piece of advice is that you hear the expression, it's a marathon, but sometimes you have to sprint, sometimes you have to hurdle, sometimes you javelin throw yourself. Like, it is a marathon, but in between all of that, you're doing a whole bunch of other things that you need to be aware of, sprinting, running, hurdling, all that stuff. But it is a marathon, and I think everyone's path is different, and you just never know what opportunities are going to come and what they're going to come from. But I think, just stick to doing what you love because you love it, and then the right opportunities do emerge. Yeah, you have to kiss a couple of frogs, though. Yeah. A lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm shaking my head. I would definitely echo everything, all this, and I will add that do not wait for inspiration to show up, whatever you produce. The idea that you can just linger and just it's going to appear magically is not true. You just have to get up and work, and it's going to come. Someday it might not. But the most important thing is to show up, really, for your work.
Yeah. I think if I had to and I would add to that, sometimes when you are stuck and you decide not to wait for inspiration, you might not like everything you're making, but you have to continue to make in spite of that. Just keep going.
You don't have to show everyone everything either. So you make some terrible work and it's private. You hide
it. That's for your eyes only.
Yeah.
Any upcoming projects or anything you'd like to share that you're working on?
I am happily in the studio with no show deadlines. That work I birthed for the show in Hong Kong was a lot, and moving and all that. So I'm in the studio experimenting, playing again, just producing. I have some fairs that I'll be in, and then a talk I'll be doing with Tamashi Jackson and Jeffrey Maris for the Studio Museum. And that'll be online, and that is April 2nd. I put it in my phone. 2nd. I think so, yeah, it's coming up. I put it in my phone because I'm terrible with dates.
We'll send it to Cliff.
Yes, April 2nd on Zoom at 6 p.m. So that's the most recent thing, yeah. I'm just making, yeah.
Elizabeth?
Body of work.
Well, I am also in the studio every day. This is my second home. Maybe my first, actually. And I'll be in the fair in New York, I think TEFA, in May. I'm prepping for a show next year in New York. I think that's it.
That's plenty.
I think it's, is this on? Yes. I think it's really, what a great gift to, wait, I have to move. Hear from both of you talk about, an art practice seems to be, in your case especially, the accumulation of a life. And I think we often forget that how we arrive where we are is a process, it's a life. Do you know, being a little brown kid in Harlem, fascination with books at 6, and look what happened. You know, I like the Hannah Arendt quote, you know, like the life of the mind, you know? That's what we kind of live. I'm really happy that you came and you talked. We want to ask some questions, or can we ask you a couple of questions? Hopefully some people have, see, I knew it. I'm going to wrangle the microphone.
First question to Alexandria. Your figures are really interesting. I'm interested in learning how you get to them, if your background in character design had anything to do with it, and also how being in an environment where abstract art is like a major thing and less so figurative, if that had an influence on your work.
I have another question.
Aggressively committed to the figure, and I always have been, even when I was told not to paint figures. How do I arrive at this place? I think it's just been drawing a lot. I'm in the middle of a drawing a day, or a sketchbook a month, I'll say, since October. So I'm drawing almost every day and making like 30 days of drawings, and that's what I'm doing for the year. And I started that for a year, and I started that in October. And I think drawing has been the way that I arrive at sort of this language, drawing for sure. I don't know if my experience in London had an impact. On the figures per se, but it did have an impact on the color palette. I mean, I was making more cooler colored palette, like more blues and cool colors in my paintings. And then when I got to London, it started really dark, and then the light and these brighter paintings emerged. I think I was resisting the London weather. So now they're like, all these works are made in London. So then it's the complete opposite of what I was experiencing. I think I was trying to bring the light in through painting. So yeah, I'd say drawing, maybe just the London landscape definitely impacted my color sensibility. And yeah, I think it's just been drawing for a long time and making for a long time. And I'm sure my love of animation and character design has continued to play a huge role. I'll go to the movies to watch an animated film still, because it's incredible art. So I'm still very, very much in love with animation, and maybe one day I'll make a film. We'll see. I know who to tap for that. It's such an art. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Okay, good evening. I'm like, it's not afternoon time. I have a question for you all. This was so powerful, by the way, in many ways that y'all probably don't even understand. And I feel to ask a very powerful question, because not only does it translate in so many different languages, but our psyche. So I want to challenge to say, how do we mentally prepare ourselves to receive art? Like, what is ways that we challenge ourselves to connect with artists? What do we need in today's time? Because we're such in a contradiction right now when it comes to art, and especially for people of color. So what do we need to do? You know, what is the message that we have to continue to like shine so it could be respected, and then so it could gravitate towards the world, because it's not just one audience, it's all. So that's my broad question that I have for you guys, because I think that's very important to, you know, understand the levels, because there's so many different factors that goes into art, and we are art. So
Thank you for that. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think we're in New York City, where art is so integrated into our daily lives. If you're intimidated by going to institutions, or you find, the entry prohibitive, you can experience art, public art programs. You can go to an open house at a university and see emerging artists who are still learning. There are many entry points to learn. I think if it's something that's of interest to you, then I think psychologically, then there are many, many ways to experience it and, feed that impulse. I think, that's the best way I could say that.
I wonder if in part maybe your question is about audience. I think the both of you have been talking a lot about audience. I love the stories in the beginning, Monique's questions about your first encounters, with art. It reminds me of this beautiful scene in Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain when the couple is in the museum. Do you remember? Mm-hmm. And he's recalling how they're being scrutinized in the space more than what it is they're seeing on the wall. And just the horror, the bravery it took in that scene for this couple in love to go into a space that really historically had not been created for black folk, right? So being in the Louvre and seeing that piece, revelation. Seeing Matisse at the National Museum when I was a kid, revelation. Mm-hmm. So it's about, I wonder, is that important? The notion of the issue of audience, and the issue of access. Perhaps certain populations don't believe they have permission to enter into certain, what are certainly sanctified cultural institutional spaces.
Yeah, I think about education a lot, and when it comes to access and how much arts funding is being stripped from the school system, right? And that's a huge part of the problem. It's that preventing access for certain demographics, usually poor communities, Black and brown communities, are being stripped of that access. And I was an art teacher for over a decade in Harlem and East Harlem and the South Bronx, teaching for the DOE, teaching for charter schools, and I saw it firsthand, just slowly being chiseled away at. And I think it's important to integrate the arts into every aspect of teaching, not just leave that exclusively for the art teacher or the music teacher. And I think, students, my students had never left Harlem, had never left their 5 blocks, and they were down the street from Studio Museum. So taking them to Studio Museum, they were just like, oh, we can just walk in here for free? They didn't know. And it's down the street, they passed it every day. So access isn't, and audience is key, but I think it's everyone's responsibility. And I think that's the biggest problem, is left to those of us that are designated art teachers, right, music teachers, dance teachers, as opposed to everyone being on board and committing to ensuring that students and young people have access starts really young. And that then they understand that as they get older, they still have access. Because then you get to, my college students, who some of them obviously not at Yale, because it's different, right? Yale has a bunch of institutions, the Yale University Art Gallery and British Center for the Arts, but other schools that I've taught at where they didn't know they could just walk into galleries in Chelsea and feel welcome. And I think it's also the responsibility of the gallerists and the institutions to open their doors and create programming that invites people from every background to come in and to experience the art. Yeah.
And galleries are really giving institutions, a run for their money in that way, really sort of putting on institutional level exhibitions with programming.
Yes, exactly.
And for anyone who can walk in. So that's important to know.
Yeah. Ebony is doing that at 52 Walker.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. Ebony Haynes.
It's huge, yeah.
Do you have, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Hi, thank you guys for such a great conversation. I was just curious, you both have figures with such strong presence, and in particular, I love how they both like gaze back at the viewer, like with the eyes and with the girl with the hoop and stick. That's like incredible at engaging and implicating the viewer. So I was just curious how you guys came to that kind of idea.
Well, I like to have the viewer implicated in my painting. So if the protagonist is looking at you, you're going to feel involved. I also had this with Harriet, when you know all her background and everything she's been through. I mean, she's accusing you in a way to let that happen. So I think the gaze is very important, to have you implicated in everybody's story and in her story as well. So I think the look is very important, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, similarly, I think it's a way of challenging and daring the viewer to be a part of the narrative, to be a participant in a narrative, or just to be a voyeur of the narrative too. So, like, that's why I'm obsessed with eyes.
Yeah, and you can't look away because she's not going to move. It's in 2D, so
exactly. You have no choice but to
no
do something
choice,
with that. Yeah.
It's in 2D, but there is a theatricality to both bodies of work, both artists' work, and I think it's Alexandria. You talk about emotion in the work, and I do see that, and I do feel that. And I remember when I first encountered your work, Elizabeth, it's like, how does one paint someone thinking? You can convey a lot of emotion with your figures, and I think that's another commonality that I see in the work.
Well, also, I think storyboards helped a lot.
Yeah.
It's like comic books.
Yeah.
Like, you really have to convey a lot of emotion with just one stroke, or just one frame,
Yeah.
the way you cut it, the way you frame it. So it helps the story, definitely.
I mean, I think also looking, the gaze, returning the gaze, and there's a way in which the viewer is implicated in looking, but also being looked at, so that the figure in the piece becomes more subject and less object. And that is what can be startling for some viewers. I'm staring back at you. Within the kind of, those particular architectonic drawings, right? Like with that grand architecture, that's not the gaze that one presumes to be returned to the viewer.
Right.
Yeah. That's unhousing in some way. Okay.
This question is for Elizabeth. I was wondering if you could walk us through one of the paintings that we can see on the slideshows. And just because you mentioned symbolism and...
Yeah. I mean, I can talk about this one, which is Harriet Jacobs, so that's great. So she is from North Carolina. So, for example, the cardinal bird is from North Carolina. I'm going to do quickly because it's going to move. And you see two halves of the grapefruit on the table, and she had two kids. And the way she had them was a bit bittersweet, and she talks about it in her book, because she had a relationship with a white lawyer in town, because she was basically harassed by her master, who would not let her go, and basically she decided in a way to deter him to have a relationship with this man in town, and she had 2 kids. And I think it's the bitter and sweetness of having them. She was a seamstress, so that's why you have like a sewing kit. And on the painting, but you don't see it anymore. Oh, there. Mm-hmm. On the painting in the back, you can't really recognize it, but it's actually a painting of, oh God, I don't know how it is all of a sudden I don't know how it is in English, but it's it's Susanna and the Elders, that's what it is. And it's the story in the Bible where she is taking a bath, and you have these 2 old men coming and trying to seduce her, and she basically says, no, thank you. And they go back to the king and complain and said, well, basically, she tried to seduce them. And because women at the time had no voice, they believed the guys. But the king had a little doubt, so they thought, well, he separated the two men and interrogated them separately, and the story didn't match. So they got, put to death, and she was free. So I thought it was an interesting story to parallel with her as she was harassed by her master. Mm. And also the sunflowers are a symbol of, obviously sun, but they're wilted. So it means it's also her being, I'm going to use the word depressed, because she had to hide for 7 years in the attic that was 7 feet by 3 feet. And she finally escaped because she was found out. Otherwise, she probably would have stayed there, I would assume. So that's the type of symbolism I incorporate in my painting, so for you to know more of the story.
I mean, I'm interested in what Alexandria said about how both of your interest in literature, in the word, is not about a direct illustration of the text, maybe reference to it, but not directly so. And before we go, I just had the thought of the great Barbara Chase Ribot. Mm-hmm. And the 2 of you, of course, know Barbara Chase Ribot. The French side of you knows Barbara Chase Ribot. You know also Ribot wrote the first autobiography of
Skowhegan.
Thank you very much. Have you thought about, as Morrison says, you have to write the book you want to read?
Yes.
Have you considered the perhaps next trajectory of your creative life will be writing? Could it be text? Does it have to be animation or film? Mm-hmm. Just a thought, just a little tease.
I'm always writing.
Yeah.
I'm secretly writing. So
I got it out of you. Good.
There's a lot up here. I think I have some amazing poets in my life that are coaching me through the imposter syndrome of being a visual artist that writes and not feeling like that work is worthy of being seen. So it's happening. Yes. I think they're just gonna kick me through the door at some point, and there it's gonna be. So yeah.
That's great news.
Yeah.
Well, this was something I tell you brilliant graduate students all the time. Writing is so important, can be really critical, crucial to the practice of making your visual art. Not that you have to be a proper writer, but the creative research that you have done, I think, is super inspirational to me. I hope the students also find inspiration in the power of that kind of critical, creative research, looking at literature and other forms of expression to think about enlarging, embellishing, expanding your own language. I say all the time that artists are not a singularity. We are multiplicities.
Mm-hmm. We are not a monolith.
No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cliff, thank you so much.